Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second summit-wide panel and the closing segment of the 23rd Pittsburgh Racial Justice Summit. If we did this in person, we would all be in a big auditorium right now, but I'm just as content to be able to share this virtual space with you all. Our audience, presenters, panelists, and keynotes come from many places and many time zones, and I'm thankful that going virtual has enabled us all to expand not only the conversation, but also the congregation in that way. I'm Phoebe Din. I'm one of the co-chairs of the workshops and programming committee with Kevin. I go by the she and they pronoun series. And I have the honor of introducing our second and last summit-wide panel for our program this year, which is the Radical Artivist panel. Our panel will go on for about 60 minutes, leaving 15 minutes at the end for audience Q&A. So you can use the Q&A box in your webinar window to input your questions throughout the session, and we will select questions to answer from there. Now, art is powerful, and the artist holds the power to honor lived experiences, reflect realities, and catalyze transformations at scales both large and small. Radical arts can free our imagination and embolden us in our collective work towards intersectional, intergenerational racial justice. In this panel, we will hear from 4 artivists about their crafts, their relationship and approach to artivism, the role of radical, intentional art in movement building, and more. Please welcome our moderator for the Radical Artivist panel, Becazela Nguni. Becazela, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience and help us get acquainted with the panelists?
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. And thanks for being here at the Pittsburgh Racial Justice Summit. And we are just excited to have opportunity to share space with you during these times. I know that it's hard, and it's always a blessing to be able to share space when we can. So I have the honor of holding space for this conversation today. Again, my name is Becazela Nguni. I use she and they pronouns. I am a librarian who is in support of music and all the things and us making radical noise. I am an artist, and I am a person in the world learning as much as she can and trying to do her best. I am really grateful to have been a member of the Pittsburgh community for 19 years. It is my home, and I have learned so much about the world, so much about art, and so much about community here. And I'm excited to share the space with Christina Castillo, with Jasmine Green, and Daryl Kinsel today, because it's wonderful to meet them in new ways by seeing their art again and again, because there's always something that I learn from seeing their pieces. And just also, Jasmine and I haven't had much time to spend together, but getting to know her a little bit more is really exciting. So I hope for today for an opportunity for us to really get to know these artists, to learn more about their practice, what inspires them, and to really hear what drives them in terms of their work and their vision for social change. So excited to hold space for that, really coming with curiosity, not any answers necessarily, because I think we're always trying to we always want quick answers to the challenges that we face. And I am excited that art is centered today, because art is not just about quick answers, but also creating space for us to dream, to imagine, to vision, and to tap into a space beyond this current reality. And artists really help us to do that. And so I hope that you all, take some time to get comfortable wherever you're at, and just tap into the voices of these artists today. So as I shared before, I'm with Christina Castillo, with Jasmine Green, and Daryl Kinsel. I've asked each of them to share about themselves and their practice in the beginning, and then we'll go into conversation. I'll have a chance to ask them some questions, and they'll be able to be in dialogue with each other. And then the attendees, we welcome you to ask questions of the artists as well. So I'm excited to share some of this art that is so beautiful, so touching, so powerful. As I had an opportunity to look through some of the artwork that these artists have created, I found myself being encouraged, being reminded, and being just being held in a certain way. Because as I said before, and I know everybody is, we're all trying to do our best during these times, but having messages that encourage us to remember that we are present to a miracle here in life, and having people who are courageous in their living, who are speaking out, who are using their creativity to spread messages that encourage us and help us to vision for a new future. We're lucky to be in community with folks like that. So I'm going to start to share my screen. I'm going to invite Christina to share first, then Jasmine, and then Daryl. And I'd like to also share a little bit about each person before I share my screen. But let me just start by introducing Christina. Christina is a Peruvian cultural worker living in Pittsburgh. They create art as an organizing and accessibility tool to help people imagine what change can look and feel like. Their work is so incredible. My first piece that I had from Christina was a hanky from the Hanky Project. And it was about breathing and holding space for our communities. And I feel like their work is sacred. It's really, really special, and it's thoughtful and intense and tender. And I really just appreciate all those qualities. And I have the opportunity to work with them in some community spaces, and they've always been so gracious. And so I'm looking forward for them to share a little bit more about who they are, what they're doing, and the vision for their work moving forward. Jasmine Green is a Black visual artist who's born and raised here in Pittsburgh, and growing up in this city, which is known for its segregation. She found that it was difficult to see positive representations of Black women, and that was far and few in between. But she has grown to create space in collaboration with other community activists and artists. She works really hard with One Hood Media, which is an art collective based here in Pittsburgh, dedicated to utilizing art to raise awareness of social justice in the world. She's also a poet, and her work is just really vibrant, and it's magical and exciting. And I'm excited to meet her in this way and to get to know her even better. And Daryl is our final panelist, last but not least. And Daryl is an award-winning creative entrepreneur and cultural agitator. He expresses his creativity through painting, installation, curating, non-traditional performance, and hashtags. And Daryl is definitely someone who is grounded in community building and challenging the status quo, and is one of the co-founders of Boom Concepts, which supports marginalized artists and is doing so much in this city. So it's a wonderful panel today. And I just hope that you all ask them questions about what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what their vision is for the world. I know that one of the things that excites me about artists is how they challenge us to think beyond this moment, beyond this time, beyond the binaries that we know. And it's a very liberating way of existing. And we can only, continue to create space for that, because that's what we need. So I'm gonna invite Christina to share first. Is that all right with you? Yes, and I'm gonna share my screen so that folks can see your face as well as your work, and give you the floor. So we wanted to invite you to share your reflections on this idea of what artivism is and how you see yourself moving in through the world as both an artist and an activist. And I'll share that the first person who used the phrase artivism with me was a friend of mine, Black Rat Medusa, who does an incredible amount of work in both spheres to change the world, both creatively and politically. And that is one person who really embodies the idea of artivism. And so I'd love to hear, what your thoughts about what artivism is, how you think about activism and your work, and also really share about your practice, your influences, who are some of your creative influences, and what's been important to you recently. So welcome, Christina. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Christina. I use they, them pronouns. Um, Professionally, I work as a visual strategist and artist for the Alliance for Police Accountability for Sisters Pittsburgh and for Pittsburgh United. Um, so, because all of the different organizations kind of reach a whole spectrum of issues that I care about, it feels important for me to kind of like um, practice being a mirror, right? Because that's how I sort of see artivists or artists in the movement is kind of like being a reflection of the organizing that is happening. I try to create a lot of art that is like a tool of accessibility. Sorry, I think someone, oh, yeah, sorry. If I need to speak slower, you can definitely let me know. I'm sorry. Um, but yeah, so I do try to spend a lot of time hosting art builds that brings a whole spectrum of people together to be able to create art together. But for me personally, I do think that art kind of serves as a mirror and a reflection and almost like a living vessel. I think it like has potential to expose like how we are connected to each other. So that's something that I like to include a lot in my practice. Um, and yeah, I think that because we experience a lot of trauma and grief so viscerally and we can feel it in our bodies and see it so clearly in our hearts, I try to use that same understanding for how I make art. Like I want it to be um, big, and I want it to embody the the passion and the love that gets poured into the organizing that it accompanies. Um, I do think it's a point where people can see what the change that people are working towards can look like. I think it's like a point of access for tapping into like connecting to ourselves and each other a lot more. Um, and yeah, I think for like um, in terms of who I know there was like an array of questions that I was asked beforehand, so I'm having like trouble remembering all of them. But I think there was a piece about like who influences me or what influences my work. And I think for me personally, there isn't like one specific person or event or like topic. I think it's more so like pieces of experiences that I get to see in people, whether in my lifetime or through, you know, reading or, yeah, kind of digging into the history of things. Um, and I find myself constantly learning ways that people are like tender and connected to each other, even through trauma. So I try to um, like creatively be influenced by that. I hope that my work can embody a lot of the like passionate, like colorful insights that I see peeking through people, even through like a lot of turmoil. Um, and oh yeah, there was that piece about what artivism means. And I think I don't know. I think we're kind of in like a time where activism has to be reimagined. Um, so now I think it's some like I think people are incorporating a lot of visuals. People are almost like visually organizing now, which isn't particularly new, but it is a shift that I think people are kind of like pivoting into strongly. Um, and so for me, I think activism kind of feels like recognizing that there's a lot of danger around us, and there's also a lot of possibilities as well. So like I think being an artist or an activist is kind of being right in the in between and like seeing both horizons, and kind of figuring out what to do with seeing all of that. So yeah, these are some of the pictures that you're seeing are products of community work and labor that has been poured into to amplify organizing efforts, whether that's things around housing justice, worker justice, and everything in between. So I think I like to incorporate a lot of points where people can enter the work, because I don't think that artists should really be making sure the gates are kept closed, or trying to be protective about their craft. I think it's something to be shared and learned, and I think there are a lot of keys to be made. So I think kind of producing these like community labors of love is important, because we're all a part of it. So we should all be able to feel what it is to make something very beautiful, because it is possible. Yeah, I don't want to talk too much, but I'm kind of forgetting the questions, but I hope that answered it.
Thank you, Christina. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. No, you covered many of the questions, and it's really for you all to offer your reflections and what feels good to you about your practice. Thank you so much for sharing, and we'll have opportunity to ask questions in a little bit, but I want to invite Jasmine to the stage, as we like to say, because you're going to be up next. So yes, once again, we want Jasmine to share about her arts practice, to reflect on what it means to be an artivist, how she's doing that in her work, how she's connecting social issues in her work, and a little bit about what some of her influences are as well. So Jasmine, are you ready to share?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine. Like was stated earlier, I'm from Pittsburgh. Like, this has always been my home. Well, first, I just kind of want to reflect a lot of what Christina said, because they just put everything so succinctly about like how I've always felt about my creative practice and my responsibility to use it as a vehicle of like pushing forward social issues and allowing others to be seen and to help heal from a lot of the trauma that takes place in just the work that needs to be done. I guess I'll start from the beginning. But yeah, I was a student at the Woodland Hills School District. And during my time being a student there, there was a lot of unconscious anti-Blackness that I noticed that anti-Blackness and respectability politics that I noticed that both myself and a lot of the student body had been indoctrinated into. And going into the city, there really wasn't a lot of messages that were contradicting that, or things that allowed students like me, people like me, to know that Blackness is a whole, complete, beautiful thing that, tied in with the struggles about the obstacles that are in our paths, that there's also a lot to celebrate. And so once I was finally able to get out of that atmosphere and started to do a lot of that unlearning process, art was basically at the center of that. It was a space where I was able to find a lot of healing, where I was able to finally look at myself as a being that was worthy, that mattered, that I couldn't be contained by stereotypes. I couldn't be contained by the way that society saw me. And it really wasn't until I saw the work of Vanessa German, who is another beloved Pittsburgh artist here, that I've just been infatuated with her since I finally learned of her, that I realized just how powerful art could be as a tool in activism. And so since I've never been a public speaker, there was kind of just this natural point where I could use art to speak to other people and to connect with them. And like Christina said, provide some sort of solace, some sort of healing, because a lot of this is traumatic. I know for a lot of people in our generation, the death of Trayvon Martin was this sparking point where a lot of this was put into focus about how society really saw us, that for at least for the past few decades before we were alive and conscious, that we just didn't see as abruptly. And so from that moment, I think, oh, sorry. From that moment, I think a lot of us really wanted to get involved in activism. And I know for me, it was really hard to, because I also deal with things like social anxiety. And so finding just even the words to speak, or, you know, how to get involved, things like that, it was really hard for me to do that. And so using art as a way to just tell people everything that was on my heart and everything that was in my mind, and allowing other people to see it and feel like, hey, this is exactly how I'm feeling. Like, I needed to see this thing in order to feel okay today. That's kind of where that all started. And then once I joined One Hood, it kind of just took off from there, where I felt, oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting nervous. See, that's social anxiety. Sometimes it pops up. But with joining One Hood, I definitely feel like I was, BAS Black Action Society at the University of Pittsburgh and One Hood here in Pittsburgh were two of these organizations that really helped me to cement all of these feelings, and finally gave me a place where I felt like I could really be courageous and not subject myself to the white gaze, and really just dive in to just the most uncomfortable, most Black aspects of activism that I could possibly do. And so, yeah, I don't want to speak too long, but that's basically everything for right now. And I just want to thank everyone for being here, and thank everybody on this panel and our moderator.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate everybody sharing so far, just holding space for the duality of what with being a witness through your artwork is, you know, holding space for both the challenges, the grief, the difficulties that we face in community, but also holding space for us to celebrate and to honor ourselves. So thank you all for that. So Daryl, I want to invite you to share next. And thank you for being here, for bringing yourself into the space.
Hey.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go. All right. Hey, y'all. I am D.S. Kinsel. I am a father, a husband, a born and bred Pittsburgher. As an artist, I am primarily influenced by hip hop culture. My mantra, as you can see, is living, breathing, seeing, being, wishing, wanting, yearning, flying, digging, searching, earning. I'm making Mr. Richie Brown work right now since 9/11/84. As I was starting to say, I'm deeply influenced by hip hop. I was not a rapper or a DJ or a break dancer, so my lane is and has always been graffiti and taking text as a way to do unsanctioned installation, public art, sanctioned installation and public art, messaging, and using text as a tool for translation amongst different audiences, a translation tool for oppressed voices, and a tool for pattern, shape, and beauty. My work also centers on using and remixing American icons. So you'll see blackface, you'll see some youth appropriate things such as army men, and repositioning them and taking different meanings and presenting those meanings in different ways, usually with a social justice lens. I do not count myself as an artivist on this panel. It was interesting to have some conversations beforehand, but you know, I see myself as a community member. I'm an artist in the neighborhood, using my tools and talents to support the neighborhood, and you know, thinking about as a neighbor to each other, I think we all have a sense of responsibility to each other. So I don't necessarily identify as an activist. I take part in some activist movement. I am agitational in a way in which I'm always looking for the truth and looking for a little bit of friction for entertainment and sometimes a little bit of laughter. But, you know, I'm interested to talk about that today with my peers and, you know, just see where people position themselves as activists, as artists, and, you know, how do we balance those things? I'm the co-founder of Boom Concepts, which is a creative hub and arts exhibition space here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This spring, we will be 7 years old, and we are centered on supporting artists and creative entrepreneurs that are Black, queer, and femme, really trying to help those artists identify their practice, develop their practice, expand their practice, and ultimately make money from their practice in ways that can be sustainable and help them advance their careers. I'm passing it back to you. That's my baby. See, you just got to be a neighbor who cares, because you might have a family, whatever your family looks like. And this is my favorite quote. You know, my work is really inspired by a wide range of artists, one of them primarily being August Wilson, all artists political in the sense that it serves someone's politics. So, you know, I count August Wilson, Donald Goins, Theaster Gates, David Hammonds as my primary influences to my work at Boom Concepts and in my personal practice. Those are happy people at Boom. So, you know, it'd be great to get it cracking and get into this conversation, because I may have some different opinions here on this panel. So I'm ready for some agitation, Becca Zayla.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. I'm so excited to have y'all and to hear you speak from your own perspectives about your work. I think that it's always interesting how people perceive our practice. And, you know, I'm glad that you can speak from your own set of values as someone who cares, as a community member who cares. And I think that that is one of the, you know, foundational points of activism, is that there's care for self and for others in that as a practice. And also, you know, us building communities and relationships comes from whether or not we are intentional about how we hold space for one another, how we show up for each other. Because a lot of times we can think about the big ideals around what, you know, what it means to change the world, but does it start with how do you turn to your neighbor and see them as a human being? How do you turn to your neighbor and show yourself as a human being? And how do you all work together? So I'm excited just to open up the space for you all to talk with each other as well. And I'm wondering what has personally, you know, Daryl, you spoke about this a little bit, but what personally drives your commitment to caring about your neighbors and also to caring about your communities and folks that you have been in relationship with in terms of this work? So is there anything that you'd like to share with us that sort of hits a personal point that fuels you?
Yeah, all of my work is values driven. You know, we're not driven by profit, although profit and, you know, being able to have food, water, shelter, fun, good times is very important. You know, our work is values driven. So, you know, our collaborations, you know, thinking about folks like One Hood, you know, we overlap and align with values in One Hood. So we're always looking to work with organizations like that. And that really comes, I think, from my upbringing. You know, my father, I think about my father, this is why I say I'm just a neighbor. You know, my father was a construction worker and he lent his gifts and his tools to the community in a variety of ways, both as a father and a man in community, but also his trade and supporting people with, you know, fixing things in their home or maybe supporting different community events. And again, you know, just as an artist, I think I'm seeing myself in the same way. I probably just like to raise a little bit more hell than my father.
Thank you.
I can probably follow up after that. I think what the driving force for my work is what do Black people deserve to see in art? I think a lot of, how do I want to put this? I don't think, and this isn't even like, I don't think, there is an art that is historic or traditional that really cares to center Black people as a people that are worthy of being seen, that are worthy of being acknowledged. And that's the work that we call traditional, like very Eurocentric work. Obviously, there is work that preceded, but it's kind of been pushed to the margins, even though it predates a lot of Eurocentric work. And that on itself is an injustice. There really shouldn't be, kind of like that quote from August Wilson that Daryl brought up too, like all art is political. And so if there's art that is quote unquote apolitical, it is serving that Eurocentric, the norm, not wanting to challenge what it is already in place. And so I think, which actually, Daryl, I don't think we're going to disagree that much as you said before. But I want to disrupt that. I want to be a part of the thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of artists that are doing that work of censoring the people that have been pushed to the margins. And so for me, I want to do my part in censoring Black people and Black women, specifically Black femmes, and letting them know that they are seen, that they deserve to be celebrated, but they also have issues that deserve to be talked about that, aren't just going to be pushed under the rug because they may not be positive or uplifting, because we deserve to not feel uplifted we deserve to not feel like everything censoring us also has to be uplifting. Like we can also really get into the things that cause us sorrow and sadness. And so that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Jasmine. Christina?
I think a lot of the reason why I do my work is kind of like to practice this concept of dreaming. Like, I think using our hands and our bodies in the ways that we can to
Christina, can you either raise your volume or come closer to the mic? I hear there's a few folks that are having trouble hearing you. I mean, want to hear it exactly.
Is this better?
It's a little better.
Sorry, my laptop is 10 years old. So, is this better?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was just saying that to be able to use our bodies and our hands to manifest the things that we're working towards without even really knowing what that looks like fully, I think is what drives me, is having many people touch the work and touch the worlds that we're trying to build. Feels like a driving piece of my work. I also think there's this other driving force of we are working towards creating art, or I'm working towards making art that can be passed down. And so there's a lot of community that has to go into that, a lot of care, a lot of vulnerability. So I like to be able to physically pour all of those things into the tools that I want to be passed down. And there's art as a way of truth telling, art as a way of dreaming and manifesting. So I think that's what drives me.
Thank you. Daryl, I see you, and I wanted to just ask if maybe you could fold it in also to your comment, for you to talk more a little bit about those tools. You talked about wanting to pass down this artwork for future generations. And I'm curious to hear what are some of the tools, and it sounded like vulnerability, intentionality, building, and community building as part of it, mentorship as well. But Daryl, I would love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, a lot of the work I think that people identify as activism based, really just has a spirituality to it. It's indigenous, It has spirituality. There's community connection. It takes vulnerability and being open. So, you know, thinking about work more so in that lens or frame, you know, like activist work is human-centered work. You know, all of our work should be human-centered work so that it's caring for us, it's about us, it's for us, it's by us. You know, so I just wanted to speak on what Christina was saying because it really inspired me to think about how my work sometimes takes more of a spiritual or has more of a ceremonial aspect to it. You know, a lot of times the temporary structures that I've developed in public space that are unsanctioned, you know, in part because graffiti is a federal crime in the city of Pittsburgh, but also because I think that shrine making and, you know, that temporary structure using found objects in the natural environment is something that's very innate to me. And it's a spiritual act, you know, and the things that are communicated, you know, through text, through hip hop, you know, it's just like thinking about graffiti, like writing on walls is one of the oldest fucking things you can do as a human before the word artist was even around. You know, so thinking about activism maybe as more just like a humanistic way of expressing yourself. And, you know, artists are typically helping being the tools or presenting the tools for us to communicate to each other.
Thank you. Jasmine, did you want to add on to that?
I don't know if I can. He just said that up so succinctly. That was amazing. Yeah. I guess I'll just say that I kind of feel very similarly where to Christina, I should say, where there is a lot of that envisioning process that goes into just from the inspiration to the actual creation of the art, where like I'll just see something or I'll be talking with someone about, you know, something going on in our community or in the world. And it will just be that like lightning bolt where it's like, oh, I know like how like I could possibly bridge this like gap in communication, or I know how I can like, you know, create something that allows someone to feel seen. And that, sorry, I hope I'm not talking too fast, but I think we don't talk about the envisioning process as much as I feel like it should be centric to this conversation, because that's really the only way forward is through that process that Christine was talking about, that envisioning, that looking towards the future, that futurism that is so important, and that makes the art that we create so valuable and so necessary.
Thank you. One of my friends, Kia, shout out to Kia Frazier, who is a loving community member. A long time ago, she said, we start organizations to do what we should just be doing for each other and with each other. Because she had like resistance to join organizations, right? And I know many of us are parts of organizations and, you know, projects and collaborations, and all of that is super important and necessary. And her point was that, you know, we want to start an organization to give each other water. We want to start an organization to make sure people have food. We want to start an organization to make sure that someone has, you know, childcare. And so all of these things are how we think we can solve, you know, the problems that we're facing. And it is about how we organize our community, what values we decide are important to us. You know, activism has been this way of us organizing our thoughts and our practices so that we can find community. And hopefully it can be a way for us all to remember, you know, what it is we want in this world. Right? So whether or not you're a part of an organization, or if you're just, you know, excuse me, not even just, but if you're also working out of, you know, with your community members on your block and saying, we're going to make sure that all the young people on this block have toys. We're going to make sure all the young people on this block have school clothes. We're going to make sure all the young people on this block have school supplies, have, you know, books to read. That's also a form of care, right? That you can activate with or without an organizational title, right? And I think what I'm hearing as a common theme from all of you all is, and we shared this earlier, is just, you know, this foundation of care, this cornerstone of care that is really encouraging to me, especially in this time, because it can be you know, this moment of like, well, do we care about one another? And I think in moments of crisis, especially, we see how much care there actually is in the world, even when it feels really, you know, depressing and gray and we're not sure. It is those acts of care, you know, the acts of radical mutual aid that we see happening, the act of checking on one another, making sure that we're okay, and also giving each other space to see, oh, I've written you a letter, or I've painted you something, or I've, you know, adorned your, you know, your home in some way, you know, bringing beauty into each other's lives, bringing things that help us to think. Those are all aspects of this work. And I'm excited to, you know, really be reminded. I think that's something that I'm always grateful for, are the reminders, you know, that there are people that care deeply. And one of the things that was also common in several of the things that you all shared reminded me of something that Reverend Angel said last night, which was so powerful. She was talking about the ability to conceive liberation, the idea of what it means to have the ability to really be in a space spiritually and emotionally to conceive liberation. And she talked about how, you know, how white supremacy limits that ability for white folks, especially. And it was just really powerful. One of the things she said to white folks, go get your imagination. Because if you can't really conceive of liberation, how can you hold that space for us? And that's something we've been trying to do for the duration of our time and for our ancestors' time, right? And I'm wondering if you all can talk about what excites you as an artist, also within the community of artists that you're a part of, about the ways in which folks are helping, how the arts really help us to, you know, build those imagination muscles, help us to build our ability to conceive liberation and to imagine beyond this reality. You know, what is exciting you within your own practice or in your community of practice with other folks who identify as artists and who don't, because that's the other thing too, right? There's people who identify as activists and do the work. There's people who identify as artists and who don't, but also do the, you know, do that creative work and creative living. So I just welcome you all to share about that on that topic, if you'd like.
I'll try to go first. My first initial thoughts whenever you were quoting Reverend Angel were that I think a lot of white people, at least in this country, because that's the only experience I've had, a lot of them see society, like American society, as already being liberated. And so the idea of going any further in that direction is like, because they would have to give up some aspects of their power, they see it as like moving back from their own quote unquote liberation. And so I think for me, what helps me to be imaginative, because being in this society, at times it can feel impossible to get away from the white gaze and what, you know, Eurocentric values try to pull us back from that sense of liberation. That's where I really love being in community with other artists who will challenge me on that, whose art I will look at and like, I'll kind of get that gut reaction of like, oh, can we really like go this far as a society? Can we really make these changes? And then I'll get that reminder, like, of course we could. Like, why don't we deserve a society that values all of us and that sees us all as equally human and that cares for us and that makes sure that, you know, none of us are going without and that none of us are feeling isolated? Like, why shouldn't we deserve that? And so, for me, just seeing other people's art and like, even if I'm able to talk with them, just like going through how they envision a society and just like allowing myself to fully immerse myself in that and allow myself to dream. I think it's just, that's one of my favorite things. And one of the things that I'm really missing with being in a pandemic is that it's harder to get those kind of interactions. But I see a lot of people continuing that discussion online. And that's probably my favorite part of being in community with others.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can share a little bit too. I agree. Like, I think the dreaming together aspect is definitely one of my favorite parts. And then I think like maybe favorite is like the wrong word for me, but like an important piece too, I think, is being introspective on like the ways that we are working that almost uh model all of the violent forms of work that we've been accustomed to. So like I know everyone is very eager to get to the end, you know, to move on to like do the dream work, the heart work, and like trying to be like very um visionary in that sense. But I think there's also some like grounding that we need to do that involves like not neglecting what our bodies are feeling historically, you know, because things get passed down, and like not operating from a sense of like self-sufficiency. So I think like making sure that we are caring for like the the waves of history that we carry in our bodies currently is like a really important piece of my work that I like to incorporate. You know, it's like it I think it's like two-folded, right? Like you make something beautiful, but also like it's really messy to get there. Um, so I think um yeah, I think like being very reflective on like the systemic trauma and like interpersonal traumas that we're dealing with on a daily basis is really important, because I think like those are the points where we find out who we are and who we aren't. Um, so like systemic trauma, I think, is like a really big piece of that, right? We're at the Racial Justice Summit. Like people here are going to find out who they are, who they've been, and like who they aren't. Um, so I think like when art becomes so personal, and almost, you know, and activism also becomes so personal where you can't remove yourself, I think it is important to like um, yeah, just pull apart the pieces and see what's there. You know, I think it's just good to like have some ground and like understand the organizing ground that we're working with, the like organizing history that's all around us and that we walk in. Um, and like art, yeah, generally is a way to carry movements lighter, right? It's like more hands, more visibility, more points of access for people. But I think in order to be able to like pass it on in that light capacity, like we do need to understand that it's a lot of heavy work and sort of like work through it, you know, instead of kind of like tossing it aside just to get to the dreamy parts.
And the question is about like liberation and freedom in relation to your practice. That's part of the question. Is that true?
Yeah, I think part of the question is about how, you know, what's the role that artists play in supporting our ability to conceive of liberation, you know, supporting our ability to imagine. And I definitely would love to hear your perspective on that, and within your, you know, within your own practice, what you're seeing there, but also are there um, other folks in your community of practice that you are excited about how their work has grown you or challenged you in any particular way?
Yeah, well, you know, it's like I think one of the greatest things about being an artist is like you get to make value based on your beliefs in the system that we exist in. Like we exist in the capitalist system. I'm going to make something, I'm going to set the value and negotiate with the market for that value. So, you know, we think about issues such as like the livable wage and all these other things, like that shit don't got nothing to do with you if you're an artist. If you can be like a successful artist, or you can generate income as an artist. So that's something I think that's like really powerful and liberating, just like setting your own wages and creating that value just from your hands, from ceremony, from the movement. You know, it's like you can create a protest sign, use that protest sign to go up against oppression. You know, you can say, fuck the police. You know, you could go rally against the police. You could throw that protest sign at the police officer, crumble it up, take it back to your studio, unroll that shit, frame it, and the museum might want to purchase it. You know, like we have colleagues who created a mirror casket in St. Louis during some of the original uprisings, and a museum acquired that, and that acquisition helped to fund a larger part of their community movement around activism and anti-police state and oppression. You know, so it's like you think about folks in our culture, like Harry Belafonte, who was even able to create music, and he's still doing that to this day. You know, people like Jaziri X, who's doing that to this day. You know, it's just like generating music, generating art that may create capital for them or create capital for organization. And that's like truly liberating, like your intellectual property and being able to negotiate with the market in an open forum. I think that's just like a real world example of how practicing artists can be like helping us move towards liberation as a community, but also like still making sure you have food, water, or shelter over your fucking head, you know? And then, you know, thinking about artists or people, like how do we even get to that piece? It's just like it's about world building and future casting with your colleagues, you know, and what artists are able to do that freely while also entering into the market, you know. So we started recently at Boom, we started a reading group, which Becca Zayla, you're a part of an author whose work is centered on a town that was started from a slave revolt. You know, like in American history, you couldn't even potentially conceive that. But this brother, Ryan Emil Scott, is, you know, creating this novel where a entire town in a metropolitan area is centered and was founded on a slave revolt, and it has existed in America, you know, for 1,000,000 years or for, you know, forever, how many years. And it's just like, how does that set? You know, it's like if we get to that liberation point, you know, when you see items like that, and I'm having conversations with my colleagues in the reading group, you know, it allows us to imagine like, okay, we're working towards freedom, but like, what are the necessary structures that we need to set up so that freedom and magic aren't squashed out by capitalism and greed once we get there? Like everybody wants the utopia, but nobody want to do the fucking work once we get there.
That's a really interesting point. And I think, you know, Christina mentioned, you know, talking about the difficult work that we have to do in order to get to the dreamy places. And something, I was reading a book recently, and it was talking about the experience of an enslaved Black woman and an enslaved Black man. And this Black woman was saving her money. And this man, she was married to him, and he asked, "What are you planning to do with that? What are you planning to buy?" And her response is, "You." And in that moment, I just had this, you know, just a moment of deep recognition that as we exist in this capitalist system, you know, there are going to be a lot of ways that we have to navigate in order to get beyond that space. And we've always, in some ways, had to buy our freedom. You know, they've never let it be, it was never ever given to us, right? We've always had to fight for it. And we've always had to buy it, whether it was that we paid in cash or we paid with our bodies, right? And so there's this way that I think you talking about us trying to create a sustainable life, a life for ourselves as artists, and having to negotiate this system is really challenging, you know, because I think we can have also non-capitalistic ideals and values, but figuring out how we navigate it to get to that other place is something that I know a lot of artists, you know, struggle with, some to better degrees of success than others. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation.
You're either navigating your own vulnerability or you're navigating being exploited.
Mm-hmm. And what else? Oh. Go ahead, Jasmine.
Sorry. I've had so many conversations with other artists because I've been told like constantly like, oh, you should charge more for your artwork. You should charge more for your artwork. And I've had conversations with other artists where we kind of just come to this like shared conclusion that I would rather have art that people are able to have in their homes, that they could have a beautiful sort of space to return back to at the end of the day. Or, you know, with us all being in home, like in our homes right now, just being able to be in an environment that's beautiful and that brings them joy, rather than charging what is the like correct amount for something. And kind of like what Daryl's saying, it's like navigating this point between like this possibility of being exploited and like making sure that people are able to enjoy the things that you create. And so that's always been a struggle for me, that I know capitalism is the root of that. Like without that, there wouldn't be like this struggle where I'm deciding like, should I like stick to my values of making sure that people can have art in their homes, that they can have something that they can look back to, or do I like charge the amount that people think I should? And like I'm pretty sure like anyone who's in the audience who's an artist, or like anyone on our panel, would probably have also come across those struggles. So yeah, that's.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, Jasmine, and I'd like to hear from Christina and Daryl if you have thoughts on that. You know, what does it look like for you all to be working and living as artists? How do you negotiate the line between expressing what your worth is, you know, honoring your worth and your value, and asking for that type of support from community, and also knowing that it's, you know, art tends to be typically undervalued, and artists of color and Black artists aren't always held in the same regard as white artists. So how do you how do you have a measure of self-respect in doing this without you know, giving everything, you know, to folks without like, you know, giving, you know, pouring from your whole cup and not giving, you know, pouring back into yourself? How do you make sure that you're sustained in this work, and also be fair, or, you know, have values that don't feel, you know, so transactional or exploitative with community members? Because I think when Jasmine says, you know, making sure you charge the right amount, like in the art world, that's subjective, right? And that's also based on this value system within capitalism that assigns measurement and value to things that we create, that there's really no amount that we could say it's worth. But when people are trying to survive and quote unquote pay their bills, you know, how does community honor, you know, the artists that bring the beauty and bring the, you know, all of this goodness into spaces, and make sure that they're not also just struggling too?
Yeah, I think you have to know your market. You have to know how to set proper boundaries. So some relationships are simply transactional, and you know what to set those monetary values at for a simply transactional engagement. And other interactions, you know, maybe specifically with your neighbors, are not transactional. So there is some movement building, some community building, some knowledge sharing. You know, I think there always has to be some reciprocity. And regardless of what your profession, your sector, your job, you know, if you are in a relationship with humans, there has to be some reciprocity. You know, we all like to be poured into. We all like to be acknowledged and recharged. And buzzword is love language now and all that other stuff, right? I think so. You know, we all like certain things, and you know, it's important for each other as neighbors to really identify and share what those things are, and making sure that in our relationships, as we are sharing our gifts with each other. And I think artists, it's like easier for the artists. Maybe it's easier, or there's a lower threshold at times for the artists to share their gifts, as opposed to a firefighter, you know. So, you know, thinking about what's the level of reciprocity, and how, and just like making sure people know, you know, what your needs are in order for them to be met.
Thank you.
I also think like with the pandemic, it's really hard to like stick to what you know, right? Like sticking to what value means is so different this past year. We're about to enter a year of being in this pandemic, like reimagining how you want to be valued and how you want to be respected, or even like have a relationship to people that is like founded in your artwork. Like I think for me that's led me to like when I'm able to like reconceptualize like payment or something, so like going back to like bartering, or like figuring out what actually feels like I'm getting something in return, what feels like care that like maybe isn't rooted in money, if I can afford to not have it right now. So like that, but then that's not always a possibility, right? Because we need to make money, and oftentimes like people aren't trying to spend a lot of money on like this kind of work. So I think it's like there's like a different answer every other day, I feel like.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's really honest and powerful. I think we can hold the values of wanting to shift from living in a capitalist society and figure out what we're doing in the meantime to get there. Some of the things that you all have lifted up have really been about centering care and reciprocity, which are values that we can all be reminded to hold center. And like you said, Christina, redefining what is valuable and what does sustain us, and like talking about, Daryl, what our needs are. So being able to communicate that to our community members, because one of the things I was wondering is, how can artists redefine our notions of what work is? I know there are conversations about what would it mean to make sure that all artists also have a living wage, or are also supported, or also seen as essential workers in our communities, right? Because we're called upon often to support many, many movements going on around the world, but we're not necessarily seen as folks whose labor should be, compensated or honored, so that it is able to sustain our lives as well. So I think that's something that artists can lead in as well, because we occupy so many different, spaces in the world, but really thinking about how can we start to redefine what, how labor is appreciated and how care is shared and offered. And so I just appreciate you all, giving space to reflect on that. And I'm wondering if we can make space for some of our attendees' questions. If you all are willing, we have some time for that. And just before we open it up, I just also want to ask one more question. Is how do you think about what it means to move your audience from just looking and perceiving and engaging your art to a space of actual movement, right? So have you worked, can you speak to any of the specific social issues or policies your work has addressed? And how has it worked to like move people from engaging an art piece to actually changing the material conditions of their life or of the life of our community? Does that feel clear to folks?
I've sat directly in funding conversations and heard leaders say that artists cannot handle receiving a large lump sum of money, or are not responsible or capable of handling a large lump sum of money, either for their living or for a specific project. And I have fought against that so that artists can receive direct funding. So that's not like that's not an art project thing, but we're really focused on funding, distribution, and adequate wages. So it's like, if Boom pays more per hour for teaching artists work or direct service work or whatever, or matches a large institution, what does that say about the field? Like, we shouldn't even be able to do that, So it's like, I think those are the things that I believe are really critical for folks so that we can have more flexibility and time to dream. So like basic wages are met. I'm sorry, I know I jumped in there, but just like, yeah, I wanted to really share that.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you. Christina or Jasmine, if you have any replies to that, or I can offer one of the questions from the attendees.
Oh, sorry, Christine, I wasn't sure if you were unmuting. I didn't want to interrupt. I know I'm not a person who is as familiar with policy as, I'm trying to increase my education on the subject, but I know that I'm not going to be the person who's driving any policy measures forward. And so what I always try to do is, if it's possible, I like to share not share resources, but like share whenever I see that policy things are happening. I try to like touch on the importance of why these policy measures need to be passed if I can. And then I just usually just will link directly to the people who are doing the educating on the subject, or who are the ones pushing that policy forward. I think that we can find ways to educate people about what is going on that aren't just the traditional means of doing it, like just handing out a flyer like that, like stuff like that is important also, but sometimes we have to think of like different strategies to get people's attention. And if a painting of mine or a poem or something that I'm putting out is able to like connect someone to policy measures that are happening, if those policies need support, I think that that's just like it's an imperative for me. So
Thank you.
Yeah, I think different strategies for like different audiences is key. Because there are times where I think my focus is on like getting more like artist engagement, or like trying to bridge some gaps between like different artist communities that I'm seeing. And then then there's like another kind of audience that's like people who fund the work, who provide the resources, like making sure they just like completely, give in, and like believe in the work too. And then there's like, another audience that's kind of like when the productions are made for, like I center a lot of my stuff around like community actions or events. And so when the things are produced, there is this like general public audience of people who are either going to be engaged with the campaign or the work, or they're not, right? Like it is a telling moment of like, do you see yourself in it or do you not? Because if you don't, then like maybe step away for a second. And I think that's okay for people. Like if you don't, if like the things that you're seeing reflected back at you aren't aligning with you, then like we don't really have time for that right now. And I think about that with like all audiences across like what the different kinds of audiences that I'm thinking about, right? Like even with like funders or people who can provide resources, like if you aren't aligned with the visions that we're working towards right now, like I truly think that you stepping aside for a second is the engagement that like is important to clarify, and I don't know, like sometimes it is measurable, right? Like sometimes it is like you can work really hard on like visual strategy for a campaign and see the changes, and then other times it's just not, right? Like you kind of have to have this like you have to cast out like this belief that people in the public are changing, or like will see themselves or won't see themselves and may like step up or get out of the way. Like there is like this inherent like just like really serious belief that you have to have no matter what kind of audience and what kind of strategy you're working with.
Thank you, Christina. I think Daryl shares that August Wilson quote a lot, right? Where you're like, you have to have, and I'm paraphrasing it, but you have to have like a belief in yourself so powerful that no one else can like shake that. So thank you for offering that. A couple of folks in the Q&A. I wanted to ask a question. Daryl did respond, but I wanted to ask Christina or Jasmine if you all wanted to respond. This question was, how do you deal with the site, institution, street, place, and the context that surround us? What study is required to honor movements and people without losing yourself? And really focus on that second question. What study is required to honor movements and people without losing yourself in your work? That's one of the questions from our attendees. And I'll share Daryl's response just for the benefit of everyone. It's critical to listen to those that have come before us as a way to define how we honor space and movement. Sometimes your intention is to dishonor a space, challenge a space, or disrupt a space, but you must do the recon or research that is painful to a certain degree in order to deliver the message, the final message that is necessary. Jasmine, oh, Christina, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, the second part, kind of asking about, like, how do you not lose yourself? I think is like a challenging question. But I'm like, I feel like I have a million thoughts and none at the same time. But yeah, I think for me, like, I don't know, just like being really grounded in the power that's around you and like the power that also like lives within you, and like kind of making sure that there's like a balance, you know, like there is an important part about like doing research, knowing where you're at, knowing like where you're at in your own body versus like where you are physically, and like understanding like the both kinds of histories that exist in both places. But yeah, I think but I don't know if it's a question of like how do you not lose yourself, but more so like are you open to like finding or unlocking like new parts of you, right? With that learning, with that research. Like the research is important and necessary, and like you cannot do the work without it. But like, yeah, the ways that you will be changed by it, you know, will be changed no matter what, you know, for better or for worse. But it's like, I think it's more of a question of like, are you open to that kind of change and growth?
Thank you. And then one more question here. Jasmine, they really appreciated you talking about the difficulties of removing oneself from the white gaze and moving towards spaces that challenge you to think about and practice radical inclusivity. What are some ways that community members who aren't artists can do this?
That is tough. So I kind of have like a twofold answer because part of it comes from, so I'm also a part of the Center for Creativity at Pitt. And one of our like striving mottos is that everybody is creative. Like you may not be creative in the same way that I'm creative, and I might not be in the same way that you're creative, but we can each find ways to have this creative outlet so that we're able to I think I'm talking too fast. Find ways to organize our thoughts, find ways to communicate with other people. I think we're all inherently capable of that. It may not be in a way that is, you know, traditional, like in painting, poetry, sculpture. But it doesn't mean that that's not valid. But I think kind of going back to what Christina was saying, I think diving into the research, diving into reading other works, and kind of doing that praxis of, you know, seeing historical context and seeing all that has preceded you, and really trying to be as introspective as possible about the ways in which the white gaze impacts your own view on the world. I think that's probably foundational to being able to be able to create in this way. I know for me, it took years before I felt comfortable like really diving into a lot of the work that's like, I hate using the word radical because like I feel like I haven't gotten there yet. And I feel like that's a lifelong journey. Like you haven't achieved at being radical, like it's a continuous process. But I feel like once I was able to really challenge, once I started being able to challenge those processes, that I was able to really dive into a lot of those topics in my own artwork. So yeah, that'll probably be my answer.
Thank you, Jasmine. I guess we just have one more moment, and I just want to ask the remaining panelists if there's anything else you would like to share in closing on how, I think whiteness often does get centered in conversations and in our work, or even how we're supposed to do our work. But, it'd be really wonderful if we can think about reclaiming ourselves as the center culturally, and what are some of the ways that you all have been successful at doing that in your work? What are some of the ways that you're still working to do that? And how can we offer, members in our community encouragement around reclaiming, our cultural center?
I'm sorry, I was just like answering something in the chat. I was like asking about white people bad art, and it's like, that's cool. Like everything's for sale. Like, yo, like I want my shit to be in a museum. Like, you're not richer than the museum. The museum is founded by a white person. Like, the museum is run by white people. That's gonna take a long time to change. So it's like private buyers, or it's like, yo, somebody in Dubai might buy my art, or someone in Hangzhou might buy my art. It's just like white buyers. Like, hey, I want all buyers. I mean, that's just me. If anybody want to buy some shit after this, you can holler at me too. But I know people, Jasmine want people to buy art. Christina want people to buy art. Like, everybody should buy art. Like, that's fundamental.
Yeah, and you want to buy art with the intention of supporting the artist, and not just for it to make you appear as if you are in alignment with those values, but it would be great for you to support those artists with integrity. And I think that's what that's why all of these artists want to share their work with community as well.
And it's like, I think there is art, like people think of Black art fitting into a one way or an aesthetic or thing. And it's like, if you like a specific aesthetic, there are makers from around the globe making that type of work. So you can be intentional about where your production comes, just like you can be intentional about where you get your meat. Like, you can get it halal or farm to table or Giant Eagle or whatever. You can be intentional about wherever you acquire products. That's the great thing about being in America.
Anybody?
I'll probably say, going back to your question from before, I think I kind of want to focus on like growing, like the parts of my creative practice that I can grow in. One of the biggest things that whenever I had like a recent sort of introspective period about my art as a whole is that something that I want to focus on, especially this year, is painting more fat bodies. I've spent a long time trying to just find this capability to love myself fully, no matter what my outer appearance may look like at any given time. I know over time my body is going to change, and so loving it at its most essential, I feel like, is really important for me. But I've noticed in my own artwork that hasn't been reflected, that progress I've made towards accepting myself. And that is very Eurocentric, is the valuation of the skinny and the slender. And so that is something that I really want to focus on doing this year. I feel like I've made growths in other ways, but we're always growing. And so, yeah, that's probably a big one for me.
Thank you. Christina?
Yeah, I think, like, I think just to strip things down to like very simple language, like for me, whiteness is very exhausting. Um, and so like to not, uh, I think a way to exist outside of that is to just like find rest in the ways that you know how, and like understand that our rested selves have to exist outside of whiteness in order to be able to you know see and live that. um so I think like in order to preserve our work or ourselves and bodies, like we do have to divest from even tapping into that, right? Like that's not like, as white people figure out their shit, like I think that there's like a key responsibility that we all have to like pour into ourselves and like find rest, find joy, say no, and like try to uh just like live in the abundance that can exist outside of whiteness, because right now it is like it's a restrictive energy. It's like it's draining and exhausting, and like a way to find yourself outside of it, I think, is just like realizing what are the like simple pillars of it, right? Like I don't know, it's like badness, like exhaustive qualities. So trying to like, yeah, live reversely, I think is necessary, and also really difficult. Like it's hard to uh, like divest from even our childhood dreams. Like we have to let a lot of stuff go, and we have to forget all the ways that we've been taught and all the ways that this world has held us. And it's like it almost feels impossible, but it definitely isn't. But yeah.
Thank you. So if everyone can just share a way for the folks to support you, that's how we'll close out. And, you have shared with us another world is possible, Christina. So we do know that that is a reality. And as we close out, we just want to say thank you all for having us. Thank you for listening to these artists today. And if every artist can just share how you can be supported or reached, I think some of the folks in the audience would like to know how to do so.
Yes, please. And because they like you too. Put it all in the chat. Your website, your Instagram handles, your Venmo, your, all the things, please.
Yeah, a number of folks have asked how they can support you. So thank you all for joining us and for sharing your insight, your wisdom, and your experience. I appreciate it. Thank you, Phoebe.
And I thank you. I needed to take a breath there because there was so much wisdom and truth in everything that the panelists and the moderator have shared with us. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Bekazela. Y'all spoke truth and wisdom about the role of art as a medium for affirmation and centering, of connection, of meaning making, of mirroring, of care, of conceiving liberation, of traversing and maybe even closing the gap between what is and what could be. You spoke so honestly and authentically to the struggles of navigating vulnerability, self-worth, and labor, while capitalism is still in the marrow of our reality, at least for now. And you have given us glimpses into how one might navigate that schism. You centered beauty, rest, joy, in all the spaces that are outside of whiteness. And I think that's exactly what's needed for anything that's sustainable, for sustained movements. And I'm grateful to realize that our Artivist panel is so deeply rooted in Pittsburgh. I mean, Daryl of Boom Concepts is right here in Pittsburgh. Jasmine's artwork was actually featured at the Pittsburgh Racial Justice Summit last year in 2020. Christina, you have moderated and been featured on, several panels at the summit. And Bekazela, at this point, you're practically family with the summit. All right, and so in a sense, it's very rooted in Pittsburgh. And at the same time, I'm in deep appreciation that your conversation extends beyond geographical locations and disciplinary boundaries, so to speak. What a fitting panel to have to conclude, I think, our official portion of the program. And I'm repeating something I've said last night, but again, if there's anything that I have learned, it is that good things and important things cannot be rushed. So thank you to the panel for sticking it out with us. Thank you to the attendees for sticking it out with us. And at this point, I will have the honor of introducing Tim Stevens, the then president of the Pittsburgh chapter of the NAACP and one of our co-founders of the Black and White Reunion, to conclude our summit for this year.
Thanks, Phoebe. I appreciate that. And Gazella in the last exciting artistic panel. As a founder of the Black White Reunion, it's my honor on behalf of the Racial Justice Planning Committee to first thank each and every one of you for attending the 23rd annual summit. We were blessed to have 1,224 attendees scheduled to be with us over this weekend. Fantastic. As all of you know, this is the summit's first virtual event. For this number of people to be with us is simply wonderful. We wish to thank our powerful Friday night keynote speakers and members of our youth activism and radical artivism panels. We thank as well each workshop presenter and panelists, including those persons who hosted our various wellness workshops. Having 28 separate workshops, 2 panels and 5 wellness workshops states the clear commitments of those who have made this year's summit, including persons from far beyond the confines of Pittsburgh, the place to be to explore meaningful conversations to achieve a new level of justice, freedom, equity, and equality for the Pittsburgh region and beyond. There is no way we could have accomplished this number of workshops and panels without approximately 70 volunteers who gave us the much needed team support. We wondered how we were going to have our traditional community resource rooms this year virtually, but virtually we did. We thank the many organizational and agency leaders who provided videos to these community resource rooms to allow the activist community of this region to have at least some informational groups with whom they may wish to join. Hopefully our area agencies and organizations will be more equipped to empower their communities because of new volunteers recruited through the Racial Justice Summit. Nothing happens without financial support. We thank those of you who were able to donate to the 23rd Annual Summit at whatever level to help cover our costs and to allow our planning committee to once again provide scholarships to African American and law students of color matriculating either at the University of Pittsburgh or Duquesne University, so that they might be inspired and equipped to help bring about some new level of justice and equality to our region. We thank all of our major sponsors who believed in our cause enough to assist us to complete our task, to complete this year's summit. Please take a moment to look at those who contributed. PNC, Carnegie Mellon, Gateway Health, UPMC, United Steelworkers Builders Guild of Western Pennsylvania, East Liberty Presbyterian Church, Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, Winchester Thurston School, Highmark, Poise Foundation, and many of our other community partners that we have here. Our planning committee, let's go to that. On a personal note, I must thank each of the 23 members of our truly committed, creative, spirited, and dedicated Black and White Reunion's Racial Justice Summit Planning Committee, who made this weekend possible. Many of them have been meeting since June 2020. What a statement of purpose. Please take a moment to look at these wonderful workers, wonderful justice miracle workers. 2 Wednesdays ago, our nation had an insurrection, challenging the foundation of our democracy. And on Wednesday of this week, we had a possible new beginning for this nation to begin to truly live out its creeds. The new president and vice president lived up to their commitment to bring about the most diverse cabinet in the history of the United States. And on their very first day in office, signed numerous executive orders to reverse some of the reactionary and damaging executive orders from the previous administration. Powerful Black women such as Stacey Abrams in Georgia, along with her other Black and brown partners with the support of progressive white voters, showed what can happen when good, committed people come together to do good things. Georgia now has its first African-American U.S. Senator, Raphael Warnock, and its first Jewish U.S. Senator, John Ossoff. The power of the vote hit Georgia and the nation like a bolt of lightning. And 25 years ago, on October 12, 1995, 31-year-old Black businessman Johnny E. Gamage died from positional asphyxiation at the hands of suburban white police officers outside of Pittsburgh. 25 years ago, later on Memorial Day, May 25th, 2020, George Floyd died from positional asphyxiation in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many other Black people at the hands of police woke up many people across this country, spurring protest after protest in every state in the nation, and even in cities across the globe, all seeking police reform and justice in systems which have historically brutalized Black people. As these protests were seen across millions of TV screens all over America, the dramatic disparities of how Black people have access to the health systems of this nation versus people born white were also clearly on display. And then this past week, Kaiser Health News reported that Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans are dying from COVID-19 at nearly 3 times the rate of white Americans. And whites are receiving vaccinations at 2 to 3 times higher than Blacks. Summit attendees, we still have a lot of work to do in many, many areas. I request that each of you do what you can do to impact the problems that were identified in the panels and workshops that you attended this weekend. Don't leave with a feeling that you had interesting and good conversations. Leave instead with a huge commitment to attack the disparities and the injustices that continue to exist in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, in Pennsylvania, and throughout the world. Change comes when you take the first step. The first step leads to the next. The second step leads to the third. My request is that you keep stepping, that we all keep stepping. And let's step to next year when we come back to the 24th annual Black and White Reunion Summit Against Racism. Thank you so much. The summit now called the Racial Justice Summit. We thank you so much.